All right, good morning, everybody. 10 Tampa Bay meteorologist Grant Gilmore here. It's just a little after 9:30 on our Sunday morning. Hopefully you're having a nice and relaxing morning, or at least as relaxing as it can be considering the circumstances. I'm going to run down a bunch of stuff that we're looking at here with Tropical Storm Ian. I have a lot of your comments, questions that'll be scrolling just off to the side of the screen, so we'll just walk through this together. Fire off a question. If I see it, I'll try to answer it as quickly as I can and to the extent that I'm able. But I'll just start off by saying we're still working with quite a bit of uncertainty on the impacts that we're going to see, not just here in Tampa Bay, but of course all up along the Gulf Coast of Florida, all the way up into the Panhandle. So a significant area of the Gulf Coast of Florida, really watching the developments from the forecast track for Ian as we head through the next several days. So good morning to you, Julie. Good morning, Camille. Everybody, good morning to you. Happy Sunday. Let's get right into it, and let me show you the latest. This is the 8 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. So the Hurricane Center, just real quick, they'll issue advisories intermittently every few hours, but we don't get the major updates until 11 o'clock a.m., 5 o'clock p.m., 11 o'clock p.m., and then again at 5 o'clock in the morning. So this 8 o'clock advisory did not give us a new cone. If you got up early and you checked social media, or you checked some of the news outlets, including us here, you may have seen a forecast cone. We're going to show you the same cone that was issued at 5 o'clock. But in terms of those general specs which come with these intermediate advisories, wind speeds are currently around 50 miles per hour, moving to the west-northwest at around 12 miles per hour. Let me take you down to the system a little bit closer and just show you some of the features that we've been noticing developing overnight. If you look closely, you can really start to see more of that cyclonic type of feature and that presentation on the satellite there. You see some of those bands that really illustrate what we would typically expect to see with a tropical system and a developing tropical storm. So we're starting to see those features. The storm is beginning to organize as it moves away from those less conducive environmental conditions, and it starts to move into really almost ideal strengthening conditions in the northwestern Caribbean. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but overall it doesn't look like much right now. It hasn't looked like much over the last couple of days, but as we head through the next 24 to 48 hours, we're going to be looking at a very different scenario going into Monday and Tuesday than what we've seen over Saturday and Sunday. Just to show you the general circulation around the center of Ian right now, you still see more of the thunderstorms are generally on that western hemisphere of the storm. There's not as much thunderstorm activity over on the east side. That's all going to begin to change as well. We've had what we call wind shear over on the east side of this developing tropical storm, and that wind shear essentially just what it sounds like, it's wind that's shearing the thunderstorms from being able to develop. It's cutting them off. It's preventing the thunderstorms from sustaining themselves. So as we continue to track up to the north and west, it's going to move away from that, a little bit more of a hostile environment, and it'll start to really wrap up and start to really take on those true tropical signatures on the satellite. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Let me show you a couple of the watches and the warnings that are in effect. Nothing for Florida, much less the United States at this point. Grand Cayman does have a hurricane warning in effect right now. There's Grand Cayman right there, and the Cayman Islands, the eastern Cayman Islands, have a tropical storm watch in effect. And then you've got a hurricane watch in effect for that western peninsula of Cuba, and that tropical storm watch a little bit farther to the east, to where they're not going to see as strong of conditions as Ian begins to approach Monday night into Tuesday. This is showing you what we call the ocean heat content, or essentially look at it as the fuel to allow a hurricane to intensify. And we're seeing the bulk of that fuel right there in the northwestern Caribbean. And that fuel, I mean, we know that heat, right? The ocean temperature provides a lot of fuel for a hurricane to strengthen. But when you have a lot of that and it goes deep into the ocean, as storms move over the surface of the ocean, then the winds cause the ocean water to mix up, and it typically causes it to what we call upwell, where the cooler waters from below begin to rise up, and it doesn't allow as much of an opportunity for the hurricane to continue to tap into that heat of the ocean surface, because it's just not there anymore, right? So when you have really deep warm water, even if you do get some of that upwelling, it's just more and more, almost a continuous feed of energy for a storm to strengthen. And I show you all of that because watch the hurricane forecast models here. Each one of those lines representing a different forecast model, and we very much so have a passage of this potential, hurricane at this point, to be moving over some of the warmest and deepest warm water in the northwestern Caribbean. So this time frame here from Monday into Tuesday is going to really allow Ian to strengthen very, very rapidly. So we could see it go from a Category 1 hurricane to potentially a Category 4 hurricane in just a matter of 24 to 36 hours before it even gets into the Gulf of Mexico, at which point still relatively warm water there in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. It's not quite as primed and rich with that fuel, but a significant amount of warmth available for the system to strengthen. Now, as the system moves farther to the north, the water's not as warm, but you're already working with a significant major hurricane as it moves into the eastern Gulf of Mexico as we go through Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it's sort of just ramping up, and then it's just set on kind of cruise control as it heads up to the north. We'll see some weakening with the system as it continues into the northern Gulf, but at that point we're going to be working with other threats and impacts. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me show you the forecast cone here. This, like I mentioned at the top here, this is the 5 o'clock forecast cone. We'll get our next forecast cone at 11 o'clock this morning. So as we go through Tuesday morning, that's when we're expecting it to become that major hurricane with wind speeds of 120 miles per hour. As you get wind speeds up to 130 miles per hour, that's where you start talking about Category 4 hurricane. So a moderate to strong Category 3 major hurricane. And then you see quickly, once we get to Tuesday afternoon, you've got a Cat 4 hurricane, a strengthening Category 4 hurricane through Wednesday morning, and then we start to look at it. Yes, it looks like it could be weakening. However, one thing to note, a weakening hurricane at that point, due to the way that this is all looking like it's going to be playing out, it looks like the size of the hurricane is going to be expanding. So we're likely going to be seeing it become a larger hurricane, though maybe the wind speed's coming down. The winds, or the size of it, is going to be getting bigger, which means your impacts grow as well, right? So you go from maybe the impacts being within maybe a 200-mile radius to maybe a 400-mile radius or something like that. We'll see how it all plays out. But that just means more people begin to feel and experience and potentially suffer those impacts as Ian looks to be making landfall. Right now, I think you don't want to pay as much attention to where the center of the storm is. We don't put that center line on the forecast because we know that that's not going to happen. That center forecast is not going to come to fruition right here. We really have to look at the larger area of this cone of uncertainty for where that center of the storm is going to track. And that means that the impacts could extend well out to the east, maybe a little bit more to the west, but we have to play the odds here, and we have to consider the error in that longer range forecast for what we could be potentially experiencing and who could be potentially experiencing those impacts as we head through Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So just kind of some points to take into consideration when looking at the forecast cone. We're probably going to begin to see this cone become a little bit less fluctuating and begin to lock in. Now, one thing also to keep in mind as well, as we get closer to the actual event, the forecast cone our part of the forecast cone in our area will look like it's getting smaller, because what is now, we're in that day 4 time frame, right? So that forecast cone goes out to with an error of, I think it's about 145 miles. will then go down to more of just a 100 mile per hour or 100 mile radius for that potential error in that forecast cone. So we're going to see some changes in where the cone sits in our area, but I don't expect a huge shift in this forecast cone to come in the coming days. The Hurricane Center has done a good job of, I think, taking the different forecast model runs into consideration. We did see a shift to the west yesterday in this, and now the forecast models are beginning to kind of correct itself and come back to the east. So what we'll likely see is this forecast cone is going to begin to stay put, and we're going to really begin to isolate those locations for who's going to see what type of impacts and when does that begin to occur. So we're starting to make that transition to really doing the shifty thing here. Oh, is it going to go east? Is it going to go west? And then ultimately, now we begin to narrow in and we start to grow that confidence in that forecast for our area here in Tampa Bay and then across Florida as well. Just a quick pause here. I'm trying to see some comments here. I see Thomas saying the euro is the worst case scenario if it pans out. The European model, is certainly more of a direct impact for the Tampa Bay area. You're right, Thomas. I'll show you that in just a second. Let me try to find a few more. Ron saying the euro model is bad news for us here, and I hope that doesn't happen. Well, the consensus is that it would be west of what the European model is certainly on that eastern periphery of what a lot of the forecast models are saying. Let's see. Thomas Bond also saying, when will the north turn occur? That's the $1 million question. Now, yes, there's always a question of when do we start to turn this thing to the north, and then also when does it begin to curve to the north and east too, right? When does it begin to go from more of a northerly trajectory to then turning to the north and east and ultimately starting to make that heading towards landfall? If it does, it may not make too much of a northeasterly turn. I think that's still a little bit up for debate at this point. A lot of you watching from around the country. Doug saying good morning from Tennessee. What's up, Tennessee? Let's see, what else do we have here? Not a lot of you guys are just tuning in saying good morning, which we appreciate. Let me show you these forecast models here. These are just two, all right? These are the GFS, this is the GFS, which is the American model, if you will. The Euro, or the European model, is a similar forecast model. It's called a global forecast model, so it's all around the globe, but it's an excellent forecast model for helping to help give us some ideas of where tropical systems are going to track. So each one of those X's represents where the center of these models are going, and then those little circles represent the outer pressure of the deepening low pressure within Ian. All right, so we're starting off Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, so we're back timing it a little bit to when these forecast models, when we first initiated them. Looking ahead, we see how those lines get deeper. There's more and more. Those concentric circles get more and more. That's a deepening or a strengthening low pressure system as we go into Tuesday morning. At that point, we've got a Category 3, excuse me, potentially a Category 4 hurricane at that point. Up until this point, the models have been fairly good in agreement. The agreement's been pretty good with that. At this point, we're beginning to see the American model veer off a little bit to the left or to the west. Meanwhile, the European model is starting to, go a little bit more to the east. Now, as we head through Tuesday, this is where I think Tuesday is going to be a big day for watching where does the center of the storm go. Does it go more north, or does it begin to take more of that northeasterly heading? And that's what Thomas was saying a little bit ago about how that European model is a little bit more of the worst case scenario, bringing the center of the storm right into Tampa Bay around Wednesday evening, sunset. Wednesday evening is when you'd have the greatest surge threat, you'd have the greatest wind threat with the potential of the eye wall heading right into Tampa Bay. Meanwhile, the GFS stays offshore. When we look at this and I pull up our ruler here, you see the GFS model is a good 200 miles to the west. Tropical storm force winds could probably still extend out 200 miles from the center of the storm. So we'd still be seeing tropical storm force conditions in Tampa Bay, given the westerly envelope or that westerly fringe forecast of the GFS model. though the recent runs have shifted that a little bit to the east. But I think we still see impacts. We still see surge. When you have a hurricane or a tropical storm even, you have that counterclockwise circulation around the center of a hurricane, right? So you have all that wind blowing the water into the bay or onto our coast. And I even think if the GFS, which we could argue is a best case scenario for Tampa Bay, a best case scenario with this hurricane, you're still going to see surge. You're still going to see the water levels rise up to levels that could produce some coastal flooding. You're still going to see some coastal inundation, certainly along the coast, but probably up into the bay as well. You think about Oldsmar, Safety Harbor, all of those areas will likely see some surge impact. So that's one threat. And then with those outer bands, you're going to have the threat for gusty winds in excess of 60 miles per hour. You get up there into what would typically be in the criteria of a severe thunderstorm warning. We have to watch out for that. And then a tornado threat as well. We'll be in that right side, that dirty side. And then you think about that right front quadrant. If I can draw that out here, that front right quadrant is in that zone where you are dealing with the greatest impact. So you're looking at this area right up in here. Anytime you're in this part of a hurricane, and this is specifically looking at the GFS, you're going to have a threat for some tornadoes. So that's almost a guarantee as well. Obviously, everything just gets ramped up and a lot worse when you start looking at the European resolution with the model. Again, these are not gospel. These are not a forecast. These are just computer forecast models that have had no human or meteorologist input into what we can expect. So as that continues to go on to time, Thursday into Friday, see how the GFS model almost continues to go to the north. Meanwhile, the Euro model takes more of a northeasterly track up this northern part of the spine of the peninsula of Florida, and then ultimately up towards Jacksonville. Meanwhile, giving Tallahassee areas up towards Destin a little bit more of a direct hit from an expanding and strengthening hurricane at that point. But though weakening, I think the wind speeds begin to come down, but still you're going to have a huge storm that's been pushing a lot of water in the same direction. So you're going to see a big push of water with a surge threat going up to anywhere along the coastal panhandle up into the Big Bend area. Let me go back down before I go on, see if we've got any more questions here. No, Laura's saying grab a drink. Good idea. Time out. I'll be right back.
I think she means liquor.
Yeah, he's saying liquor. Bruce Field's over here saying I need a little bit of a stiffer drink than just water. So time out for a second. We just did a 2-hour Brightside show. Kind of went right into doing this Facebook Live, so it gets a little bit dry. But hey, Laura, thank you for looking out for me. I appreciate that. See, we got to look out for our neighbors, right? All right. Hopefully we'll be good now. Let me take you back to kind of the latest forecast. This one coming in from the Hurricane Center. This next map that I want to show you is a really good one for helping to plan for our preparations and our timeline for putting things together. We're looking at tropical storm force winds probably beginning to arrive through Wednesday morning. So when you look at this map here, it kind of helps break down. The colors are the probability of those tropical storm force winds. Those lines represent the time when those potential tropical storm force winds will begin to arrive. So when you look at this line right here going into coastal Sarasota County, and then you kind of advance it north into that line for the 8 p.m. Timing for potential tropical storm force winds. We're looking at those tropical storm force winds likely beginning to arrive as we go through Wednesday morning into Wednesday afternoon. So given the current forecast from a wind perspective, you'd still be able to get in some storm preps, that being putting up shutters, bringing things in from the yard, doing other things, getting your cars fueled up and running some last minute errands and that sort of thing. However, we would likely begin to receive some rain at that point. So get the stuff that you don't want to get wet doing, get that done with early. And I've been kind of saying, I think Tuesday sundown is a good time to kind of just have in the back of your mind for when whatever you need to do. Everybody's preparations, everybody's hurricane prep and kit looks different, right? So if it takes you a whole day to put up your hurricane shutters, then I mean, yeah, you got Tuesday, but you don't want to run out of time and then potentially be dealing with rain and beginning to feel some gusty winds Wednesday morning, right? You know, it may be something that you have to make the decision on today and start that process today. You got Monday and Tuesday to be able to do that. Let me show you this here. This is looking at, this is a lot to absorb with this forecast graphic, but I think it's a good one that really breaks down the threats and the timing of those threats. So we'll have a wind threat. That's just straight wind gusts that you see with tropical systems. You've got a rain and then ultimately a flooding threat, tornado threat, and a storm surge threat. If you don't live on the coast, you don't have a storm surge threat, but everybody has a flooding threat. So storm surge is different from flooding. Flooding is going to come from the heavy rainfall. We see those summertime thunderstorms. It puts rivers into our streets just on a bad stormy day. You're going to see that with tropical storm force or tropical rains as well. I mean, it's buckets, it's tropical moisture, it's a ton of rain coming down in a very short period of time. So let me break this down for you. Wednesday, all right, let's talk about winds on Tuesday. We'll start to see some winds, maybe get a little bit breezy as we go into Tuesday afternoonish. But I do think we start to experience a little bit more gusty conditions at times. If we start to see some of those bands, the winds will begin to increase. You're going to see the strongest winds within some of those rain bands that start to come through. The biggest threat for wind, from a wind threat, that would likely be beginning Wednesday afternoon, going overnight Wednesday night into the day on Thursday. Obviously still a lot we got to figure out with the timing of this storm. How fast is it going to be moving? How big is it going to be when it gets to that time frame here? And then ultimately, what's the track going to be? Rain, I think we could start to see a couple of spotty showers at times, maybe through the day on Tuesday. And then I think we start to see more persistent rain bands, and then you start dealing with a lot more of that persistent, just deteriorating conditions with this as we go through Wednesday, Thursday. Flooding threat, we could probably ramp that up to a little bit of a higher threat at times. Again, this is all highly dependent upon that track, but we're looking at least the greatest risk of flooding probably coming through overnight Wednesday into Thursday, and likely continuing through Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We got all this water. It's going to run off and it's going to go into our streams, our creeks, and our rivers, and that's going to be something to keep an eye on and watch those river levels going into the weekend and early next week. That tornado threat, a little bit ago, we talked about that front right quadrant. As we start to get those bands on that front right side of the approaching storm, that could start to give us a tornado threat. So if we get a band that's kind of jumping out ahead of this strengthening hurricane, we could see maybe a rogue tornado going into tomorrow or Tuesday night. And more likely in areas south, of course. This threat grows moves from south to north, but we'll see that threat begin to increase, especially into the day on Wednesday. Greatest threat for tornadoes probably Wednesday night, Wednesday afternoon into Thursday morning. Your storm surge threat's going to be greatest closer to the center of the storm and obviously closer to landfall. Now, even if the landfall is up in the Big Bend area, I think we still could see a significant threat for some storm surge. Maybe it's not going to be the worst that the storm's going to bring, but I think you start looking at how our bay channels all that water up into Old Bay, up towards Oldsmar, Safety Harbor area. You look up into downtown Tampa, you start working with a southerly wind, that's going to push a lot of water up into the bay. And that's going to push a lot of it up into our bayside coast as opposed to the Gulf side coast. Maybe lesser of a threat, but still likely seeing some higher than normal surge levels, depending on the path, depending on the track. Where does the center of the storm ultimately go? So that's how we break down this graphic here. Again, it's a lot. I'm going to keep using this graphic because I think once you understand it and you see what it has a lot of information, and I'm going to be tweaking this as we look at the forecast details and how the track begins to consolidate and how we get a little more confidence in that forecast. But I do think it's an important graphic, and it offers a lot of insight to help you plan things out. I'm going to pause here just for a second, take a look at some of the questions that you guys might have. Let's see. A couple of you guys talking about some private messages. We're talking about some preps that you guys do, keeping it working cooler. Please get what you need and stay safe through the storm. Andre, I think you bring up a good point. Get what you need, but don't get more than that. We got to make sure we're leaving stuff for other people. When we talk about water, we talk about a gallon of water per person per day in your house. So you don't need more than that. The water shelves are empty. And I know the grocery stores are doing as much as they can to keep these shelves stocked with water. It's like as soon as they bring out a cart full of water, they're gone again. So it's important. Don't hoard stuff. Don't take it if you don't need it. We gotta be prudent with a lot of this preparation stuff. But obviously, do what you have to do. We got to make sure that we're all taking care of things and taking care of plans for our family. Make sure you know your evac zone. If you're in a level A, B, C, be ready. We might start to see some of those evacuations for Pinellas County or maybe some other coastal counties come today. So it takes a couple of days to get people out and get people mobilized and get them into shelters if we need to and get all that stuff going. So we'll see. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. The timing has delayed a little bit, but certainly something to start keeping in the back of your head. We may see those evacuation orders come down. No evacuation orders at this point. So that's something to keep in mind. Julie's saying people are hoarding, unfortunately. It's inevitable. You're going to get people. It's a little bit of panic buying, right? You got a family of 4. You got a gallon of water per person per day. So you think about that's 4 gallons for one day, 8 gallons for 2 days, and then 12 gallons for 3 days. That's a lot of water, but you don't need more than that. And that's just drinking water, right? You can use water to, whether it's bathe or use for your toilets. If the water goes out, fill up those bathtubs. You can fill up the bathtubs Monday, Tuesday even. Take a bath, take a shower, and then fill it up, make sure it's clean. Don't use that water for drinking water, but that's going to be something that can help you, and you've got that reservoir of water if you need it for any issues that happen if the water does go out. Hopefully it doesn't, but look, we got to prepare for this. This is a major hurricane. We got to be ready for it, but we got to be smart. We got to look out for our neighbors. We can't be too selfish. We're responsible for ourselves, right? But we also have to remember our fellow Tampa Bayans, Floridians, humans. That's all really important to see. I was in a grocery store yesterday, in the parking lot, and it's just like people are out of their routines. People aren't paying attention. They're just not making clear decisions, and just rightfully so. Our heads are in a million places. We got to look out for people. I saw a car accident, and it's like something that could have been avoided, and that just made that much more stress for that family. So if you can help avoid somebody doing something they might regret or whatever, I think we got to help out. Say hi to the neighbor that you haven't said hi to in the last year or whatever. COVID's made that difficult. We've kind of really gone inward, and we've kind of done a lot of haven't looked out, and extending of the olive branches in the hands and shaking of the hands, of course, right? So I think now's a good time to start saying, reintroducing yourselves to your neighbors and your community, because you never know if we're going to need them, if they're going to need you, and how that relationship is going to evolve in the coming week. One last graphic that I want to leave you guys with, and this is the main takeaways that I've got for you this morning, and then I'll try to scroll back through and answer some of these questions here. We're going to see Ian rapidly intensify today. So we're probably going to see it go from a tropical storm to a hurricane pretty quickly later today into tonight. And then it's quickly going to go from a Cat 1 hurricane to a Cat 3 hurricane. Probably by Monday afternoon. It's going to happen quickly. And I think the tone is going to change very quickly, because it's one thing when you're talking about this and it's into the future, right? And there's nothing really to look at. You're not seeing damage. You're not seeing the satellite presentations. You're not hearing us say, oh, it's a Category 3 hurricane yet. But once we start to see that happen, I think the tone of all of this is going to change. It's going to get a lot more real and a lot more immediate with it. The Tampa Bay area is on that eastern fringe of the cone right now, but we're starting to see more of a shift, and I think more of a correction. I don't want to say a shift. We're seeing the models correct a little bit and come back to more of an agreement and more in line with what that cone is. We're probably not going to see the forecast cone change all that much in its location, but we're likely going to see confidence grow in that cone. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's looking like we're going to see a major hurricane approaching Florida. Whether it's a major hurricane when it actually makes landfall, yet to be seen, obviously. But even a weakening hurricane can still bring devastating impacts to wherever it makes landfall and beyond. You've got wind, rain, surge, all of that is still going to be a threat, even with a weakening hurricane. You go back to Fiona. Fiona was a Category 1 hurricane when it went through Puerto Rico. We saw the impacts in Puerto Rico. I mean, devastating floods, landslides. You saw some wind damage. Now, granted, their infrastructure was really weakened and at a much lower place because of Maria going back to 5 years ago. But still, significant impacts can still be felt from a Category 1 hurricane. Certainly from a Category 1 hurricane coming down off of major hurricane strength. The last thing that I want to leave with you guys today is that we're going to expect these significant impacts here in the Sunshine State. I think next weekend is going to feel a lot different for Florida than it does this weekend for many different reasons. So I think we have to take that in consideration and just take a deep breath and remember this week it's going to be a tough week. And I think whether it's for people in Tampa Bay, people in the Panhandle, beyond up into Georgia, Alabama, maybe up into the Carolinas as well, we have to remember that this is going to be a tough week. We got to take it slow, stay smart, control what you can control, and try not to stress too much about what you can't control. That's one thing that I've learned as a meteorologist, but also as someone that's here in the community with you guys. You can't stress about what you can't control. There's the concern, obviously, but if you do your preparations and you've got a plan in place and you're able to execute that plan when it's appropriate for you and your family, then you've done everything right and you've controlled what you can control. And keep checking back with 10 Tampa Bay. Download the app. Have multiple ways to get weather information, whether it's a weather radio on your phone, TV, or just a regular radio. All these places are going to be great ways to get information if you need it and when you need it. We're going to get this new cone coming up at 11 o'clock. We'll try to get another live for you on Facebook and on YouTube. But we're also posting continual updates on our website, on our app, all of which are great resources. And I'll also say, make sure you're getting that latest information from reputable sources. Social media is a blessing and a curse all at the same time, right? We all know this, the misinformation, the disinformation, the satire out there sometimes the memes are confusing. So when it comes to actual weather and preparedness and response information, try to make sure that you're getting that from those reputable sources that you trust, that you've come to know, as opposed to all of a sudden you see a new source, a new account that you've never seen before, and it's saying something that concerns you. Maybe put on your critical thinking hat and say, I don't know if that's the best thing to do. Be skeptical, and check those sources and make sure you're making sure your family knows that as well. So that's what I think where I'm going to leave you guys with today. Just one last scroll through, checking some questions here. Yeah, Cecilia saying, just stay safe, everybody. Remember your pets. Yeah, if you have to evacuate, make sure if you're going to a shelter, make sure you know what shelters take pets. Not all shelters take pets. That's always a big thing. And and when it comes to evacuating, if you've got to evacuate, you don't always have to evacuate hundreds of miles, right? You don't have to go to Georgia. You don't have to go to Texas. Sometimes it's just maybe Polk County, if you're evacuating from the coast. Maybe it's just over to Fort Lauderdale, or over on the East Coast, something like that. You don't always have to go a long way away to be able to get out of the path of danger. So let's see. I think that's about it. All right, y'all. Chief Meteorologist Bobby Destins is going to be in later on this afternoon. We've got Meteorologist Natalie Ferrari. Tyler Moore is coming in today. Rich Fields is here right now. We've got you covered. We've got you, we're going to keep you prepared. We're going to make sure you got all the information and want to make sure that you've got that connection to what's happening, because there's a lot of information. It's a ton of information. And if there's ways that we can try to break it down for you to help you understand it, digest it, and then ultimately use it for yourself to help you make your decisions, that's what we're here for. So keep checking back for more updates. We're going to be here for you guys through this entire event. Stay with 10 Tampa Bay, and we'll get through this. We'll come out on the other side of this, and we'll do it. So keep checking back with us, guys, and we'll see you on the other side of it. But look for more updates coming throughout the rest of the day into next week. All right, take care.